Today, decades later, science has spoken, and it has spoken clearly. Gender identity is an observable reality, documented, studied, and understood by modern medicine, psychology, and biology. It is no longer about opinions or beliefs. It is a fact that brain development, self-perception, and identity formation do not always align with the social expectations assigned at birth. Denying this is like denying that the Earth orbits the Sun. Yet there are politicians, from all sides, who persist in this denial, not because they lack information, but because they are overflowing with cruelty. This is not just about ignorance. It is a deliberate strategy to cause harm. These politicians want trans and non-binary children to live in fear, shame, and trauma. They aim to prevent them from growing into healthy, secure, and happy adults. They promote laws, discourses, and public policies that deny them medical care, educational support, and basic respect. They hide behind the rhetoric of child protection. But what they actually do is precisely the opposite. Destroy the childhoods of those who do not fit into their narrow and violent molds. The cruelty of these policies is no different from that historically used against women. For centuries, women were denied the right to vote, study, work, or make decisions about their own bodies. It was said that women were not rational, that they were naturally inferior, that their place was in the home. It was also said that recognizing their rights was dangerous for society. Today those ideas seem absurd to us, but at the time they were official doctrine. The same is happening with trans and non-binary people. Those who deny us rights today are the same as those who once denied them to women. There is something profoundly perverse about watching how the very groups that constantly speak of family values and child protection are the ones most determined to ruin the lives of those who simply need support and understanding. They are not interested in childhood. They are interested in control. Their goal is not to educate, but to domesticate. They want all boys and girls to conform to a single model, and those who do not must be punished or silenced. In that authoritarian logic, there is no room for diversity, much less for critical thinking. Every time a politician denies gender identity, what they are doing is legitimizing abuse. They give permission to adults to mistreat children who do not conform to the norm. They justify teachers who refuse to respect a student's name and pronoun. They empower doctors who would rather ignore suffering than provide support. They give tools to parents who, out of fear or fanaticism, impose punishment instead of seeking help. What is at stake is not an ideological debate, but the mental and physical health of a generation. You don't have to be trans or non-binary to understand that what's being done is deeply unjust. All it takes is a minimum of empathy and a basic understanding of human dignity. Denying a person the right to define themselves, to name themselves, to be respected for who they are, is equivalent to denying them personhood. It is treating them like an error, a threat, or an experiment. And there is no moral, scientific, or legal argument that can justify that. In many countries, it has already been demonstrated that when the identities of trans and non-binary children are respected, their health improves, their academic performance increases, and their overall well-being strengthens. This is not about theories, it's about concrete evidence. What harms them is not their identity, but the violence they receive because of it. And that violence is often driven by the state itself through discriminatory laws, irresponsible public discourse, and deliberate omissions. The silence that once surrounded trans and non-binary people was no accident. It was a way to erase us from history. If no one talked about us, then we didn't exist. If we weren't seen, then there was no need to guarantee rights. The few times we did appear in the media, it was through mockery, pathologization, or sensationalism. That built entire generations who were afraid to be, ashamed to name themselves, and with the sense that the only way out was denial or disappearance. Not because our identity was a problem, but because society insisted on treating it as one. Today, however, there are no more excuses. The information exists. The research is published. The world's most prestigious scientific institutions have clearly stated that gender identity does not depend on the sex assigned at birth. and that supporting children and adolescents through their self-definition process reduces the risk of severe mental health issues and school dropout. What's missing is not knowledge, it's political will. What's failing is not science, it's governments. This is not about convincing anyone to live in a certain way. No one becomes trans from reading a book or listening to a talk. No one becomes non-binary from seeing it in a show. Identity cannot be imposed or transmitted like a trend. It is something that one is born with, that is discovered over time, and that only needs an environment that doesn't turn it into a sentence. But the politicians who deny us know this. They know that if trans and non-binary children are supported early on, they will grow up strong, clear, and free. And that terrifies them. What is at stake is not only the lives of trans people. It is the kind of society we want to build. A society that denies diversity becomes authoritarian. A society that persecutes difference becomes violent. A society that punishes the freedom to be moves away from democracy. It doesn't matter whether the politician who denies our existence claims to be from the left or the right. The harm is the same. The cowardice is identical. Cruelty has no ideology. There is an obsessive insistence on treating gender identity as a threat to childhood. The same was done with women's rights when it was said that access to education or work would take them away from their natural role and disrupt the family. Today, the same thing is happening. They paint as dangerous what is actually an opportunity to grow in a more just society. Because when a child learns that they have the right to be who they are, they also learn to respect others. But for some, that is intolerable. In recent times, the assault on transgender and non-binary individuals has intensified, driven by a mix of ignorance weaponized into ideology and fear parading as moral righteousness. What's new is not the hatred, we've seen that before, but the shamelessness. Now, politicians and public figures speak with alarming confidence, declaring that acknowledging someone's identity is dangerous, as if dignity were radioactive. They claim to be protecting children when in reality they're using them as pawns, sacrificing their well-being in a desperate attempt to maintain rigid power structures that no longer make sense. The truth is, they're terrified of kids who grow up unbroken, of young people who know who they are, who can't be easily manipulated, silenced, or made to serve their insecurities. It's not protection they want, it's submission. A child who understands their identity, who names their own truth, becomes impossible to control. That child asks questions. That child challenges norms. That child grows up into an adult who won't quietly obey. And that, in their eyes, is the greatest threat of all, not confusion, but clarity. Not dysfunction, but freedom. And so they try to crush it early before it becomes a force they can no longer contain. That's why they go after children. Not because they care about childhood, but because they fear the adults those children could become if they aren't broken in time. The strategy is brutal in its simplicity. Take away language, take away visibility, take away recognition. Turn schools into places where kids are punished for being honest. Turn doctors into bureaucrats of denial. Turn parents into agents of fear. Turn the law into a bludgeon. Make sure every message children receive about themselves is a message of erasure. Shame them, isolate them, condition them to believe that existing authentically is a sin against the social order. And when that child breaks, because no child can live under constant psychological siege, pretend that this proves you were right all along. It's not enough for these politicians to silence us. They want to rewrite reality itself, to replace the complexity of human experience with a flat, binary fiction that never existed. Their narrative depends on erasing evidence, on denying lived truth, on pretending that the science they dislike simply doesn't exist. They're not interested in research or medicine or mental health outcomes. They're interested in control. They demand that we erase ourselves for their comfort, and when we refuse, they accuse us of being dangerous. Dangerous to whom? Dangerous to the lie they've built and cannot defend. They speak about confusion when what terrifies them is clarity. They speak about morality when their policies breed cruelty. They speak about family, but only when it conforms to their fantasy. They speak about health, but their actions produce harm. They speak about education, but only when it teaches obedience. Everything they say is a mask. Behind it, there is only the desire to dominate what they do not understand. And they understand very little. They confuse gender identity with ideology because they can't imagine anything outside their own limited framework. They see children who are beginning to understand themselves, and instead of offering support, they recoil. Instead of learning, they legislate. Instead of listening, they lash out. They are not defending childhood, they are destroying it. Every law they pass, every speech they give, every policy they push is designed to wound, to corner, to silence. I have lived that silence. I know what it means to grow up believing that who you are is unspeakable. I know what it means to watch yourself vanish in every story, every classroom, every family gathering. I know the weight of being named incorrectly every day, of wearing clothes that feel like a costume, of performing a version of yourself that wins approval while your real self suffocates. I know the panic of being seen as something you are not, and the despair of knowing that any attempt to correct the record may come at a cost you are too young to pay. And I also know that this harm is entirely avoidable. It is not natural. It is not biological. It is not inevitable. It is manufactured. It is built by decision-makers who know exactly what they are doing. Every time a politician speaks out against our existence, they are giving permission. They are saying, you may ignore, you may mistreat, you may punish, you may erase. They are giving doctors cover to withhold care. They are giving teachers license to disrespect. They are giving parents reason to fear their own children. And when those children suffer, they pretend to be surprised. There is no debate here. The science is clear. The data exists. When trans and non-binary children are affirmed and supported, they thrive. They do better in school. Their health improves. Their sense of safety grows. These are not hypotheses, they are facts. And what's more, they are facts published and endorsed by the most respected medical and psychological institutions in the world. This is not a fringe view. It is consensus. What harms children is not their identity, it is the violence they receive for having one. But violence is the point. These people don't want to prevent harm. They want to cause it. Not openly, of course, they're too clever for that. Instead, they wrap their cruelty in language about concern. They call their aggression protection. They turn discrimination into a virtue. They use children as shields not because they care about them, but because they know we do. And in that asymmetry lies their power. They can lie with impunity because they have no conscience to betray. They know that visibility saves lives. That's why they fight it. They know that education fosters understanding. That's why they censor it. They know that support builds resilience. That's why they withhold it. And they know that when trans and non-binary people are allowed to exist openly, society does not fall apart, it becomes more honest. That is the truth they cannot tolerate. When I hear them speak, I do not hear reason. I hear fear. I hear the trembling of people who cannot face a world that is more diverse than they imagined. I hear the desperation of those who have lost control over a narrative they once monopolized. I hear the panic of cowards who would rather harm a child than admit they were wrong. No one becomes trans because of a book, a class, or a TV show. No one becomes non-binary because they heard a talk or read a post. Identity is not contagious. It is not taught. It is discovered. It is lived. And it flourishes when it is met with understanding instead of repression. But those who seek to erase us already know this. They know that if children are allowed to grow freely, they will not be easy to manage. And that is the root of their fear. They are not trying to protect, they are trying to prevent rebellion. Because a child who is not traumatized is a child who asks questions. A child who is not shamed is a child who refuses to obey blindly. A child who is not erased becomes an adult who fights back. That is why they go after us so young. That is why they call it care while dismantling our rights. That is why they confuse silence with safety. They are not afraid of harm, they are afraid of resistance. They are afraid that we will tell the truth about our lives. They are afraid that others will listen. They are afraid of a generation that knows better. They are afraid of being held accountable. And so they attack us not because we are weak, but because they know we are strong. They attack because they see in us a future they cannot control. But here's what they cannot erase. We are still here. We are speaking. We are organizing. We are living. And we are not going anywhere. Their cruelty is loud, but it is not final. Their policies are dangerous, but they are not destiny. Their denial is powerful, but it is not truth. Truth does not need permission to exist. And neither do we. They can pass their laws. They can shout from their podiums. They can rewrite school curricula, silence teachers, censor books, terrorize doctors, and twist every public institution into an accomplice. They can mobilize their media machines and flood the airwaves with slogans dressed up as science. But none of it will change reality. None of it will stop trans and non-binary children from being born. None of it will make our identities disappear. All it does is expose the depth of their fear and the limits of their imagination. These people are fighting a war they've already lost. Not because justice always wins, it doesn't, but because the world is changing, and their refusal to evolve makes them fossils, not leaders. They clutch their narratives like relics, praying that if they scream male and female loud enough, they can drown out the chorus of real lives defying their binaries. But no matter how loud they get, they will never unhear what the world is starting to understand. That human identity is richer, more nuanced, and more beautiful than their rules allow. They don't fear confusion. They fear clarity. They don't fear indoctrination. They fear children who can name themselves. They don't fear danger. They fear liberation. Because liberated children grow into liberated adults. Adults who vote, speak, organize, and demand. And that is their real nightmare. A generation of trans and non-binary people who know their worth and refuse to beg for it. What they are doing is not a defense of morality. It is not the preservation of truth. It is not even about belief. It is control, plain and simple. It is the attempt to flatten everything that defies them, to criminalize what they cannot comprehend, to prevent those who might one day challenge them from ever standing up. They are not fighting against us because we are wrong. They are fighting us because we are right, and they know it. I've heard all the arguments, all the rationalizations, all the justifications. I've seen the fear dressed up as doctrine, the ignorance parading as concern. They say they're worried about influence, as if being acknowledged were a contagion. They say they're afraid of regret, as if silence and erasure didn't leave far deeper wounds. They say it's about protecting innocence, when in truth it's about preserving obedience. They say they want to keep children safe when what they mean is silent, compliant, invisible. But I was one of those children. I remember what silence felt like. I remember what shame was built from. I remember how much effort it took to perform the role that earned approval and how much of myself I had to kill just to be allowed in a room. And I remember, too, what it meant to finally speak, to tell the truth out loud, even when it cost me. And I can tell you with certainty, the danger never came from who I was. It came from those who tried to erase it. They want to bring us back to a time when people like me did not exist in the public eye. But we were always here. We just learned to stay hidden. That is their ideal society. One where the trans and non-binary people are invisible, closeted, terrified, or worse. A world where the only acceptable expressions of identity are the ones that don't challenge them. They call it order. I call it coercion. They call it protection. I call it violence. Let's not pretend they don't know what they're doing. These are not mistakes. These are deliberate choices. They are choosing, again and again, to side with cruelty. They are choosing to weaponize policy against children. They are choosing to reward teachers who humiliate, to promote doctors who deny care, to celebrate parents who punish their kids into silence. They are not confused. They are committed. And that makes them accountable. This is not about changing their minds. Most of them know the truth already. They just don't care. What we need is not more dialogue with those who seek our erasure. What we need is the political will to stop them, to protect children from their ideology of dominance, to ensure that schools are places of learning, not compliance, to defend medicine from interference, to tell every trans and non-binary child, you are not wrong, you are not alone, and we will fight for you, because we understand what's really at stake. It's not just our rights. It's not just our recognition. It's the soul of our societies. A world that cannot make room for gender diversity is a world that cannot handle difference of any kind. It is a world of rigid hierarchies and brutal punishments. It is a world where democracy is only skin-deep and freedom is conditional. If they can erase us, they can erase anyone who resists. And that's the long game they're playing, authoritarianism disguised as morality. But we see them clearly. We see their tactics, their strategies, their scripts. We've heard their speeches before, used against women, against black people, against gay people, against immigrants. Every generation, they find a new target and dress their hate in the language of concern. And every generation, they are eventually exposed. We intend to make sure this time is no different. This is not a plea for inclusion. This is a declaration of presence. We are not asking to be tolerated. We are insisting on being respected. And we are not going anywhere, not back into silence, not back into shame, not back into invisibility. They can keep their binary fantasy. We have reality on our